And now that we know what normalization of deviance is, I want to discuss how we protect ourselves against it. The first line of defense is recognizing our vulnerability. You're not any different than those engineers at NASA. We're all human. We all come under pressure on the job. We all get tempted to take the shortcut, to accept the lower standard of performance. So recognize your vulnerability. I just used, by the way, this NASA disaster to drive home what normalization of deviance is. But let's remember, it happens at an individual level, it happens at the smallest team levels, it happens in all industries. If you want an example, again, Harold touched on this, an example of normalization of deviance at the individual level, it's not latching a seatbelt. Why do people not latch a seatbelt? Because they've gotten away with it for 10, 20, 30, 50 years. They've driven and never needed it. That deviance is invisible to them. They've normalized it into their behavior. Do yourself a favor and your families a favor. You get in those vehicles, latch those seat belts. But we're all vulnerable, and that's the first line of defense. And another thing I'd implore all of you on these, you make multi-responses to emergencies, you can fall into the mode of believing you're so good, you're bulletproof. And you got to recognize that's not true. There's no history being created. When you respond to an emergency out there and you successfully execute, there's no history being created in the laws of physics, the physics of death that you deal with. Fire, explosions, collapses, things like that. There's no history out there that's remembering how good you were the last time and is now going to cut you some slack the next time. It's up to you to recognize your vulnerability. First line of defense. Execute to meet standards. We have an expression in military aviation to protect us from normalization of deviance. It's called plan the flight, fly the plan. For you folks, it's plan the work, work the plan. Execute to meet standards. We have an expression in military aviation that the flight manual of a modern fighter is written in blood. It's very true, because there are people who have paid with their lives to learn some aspect of the operation of this vehicle, of this plane. And now that entry is in the plan to protect our lives. And it's exactly the same in your business. There's a huge memory out there of mistakes that have been made in the past that are incorporated now in your procedures. They are there to protect your lives. But it only works when you execute the plan. You meet those standards. Consider your instincts and the instincts of the people that you lead. Obviously, we have instincts for a reason, and sometimes they can be dead-on accurate. Obviously, from reading from these memos, there were a body of people, particularly at Thicol, that were not affected with this normalization of deviance phenomena. Well, let me tell you what happened in the midnight hour, literally the midnight hour before Challenger was launched. Some of the authors of these same memos convened a special teleconference with their NASA counterparts and pleaded with them to call off Challenger's launch because the temperatures were going to be very cold, and the engineers rationalized these O-rings were going to get stiff, lose their flexibility to seal those joints when the boosters ignited, and a catastrophic leak could develop. So they pleaded with their counterparts at NASA to call off the launch until it got warmer. What was the response on NASA's end of that teleconference? They hammered these engineers. Show me the data! I can't call off a launch just because you don't feel good about it. Show me the data. We've launched in cold temperatures before, nothing bad's happened. Show me the data. They didn't have the data. It would have taken tens of millions of dollars offline testing to get the data. Instinctually, they had great fear what was going to happen if their product was used in these cold temperatures, but they had no hard data to support those instinctual fears, and their instinctual fears were dismissed out of hand. Don't do that, folks. We have instincts for a reason. If you're out there on one of these emergency responses and there's something nibbling at you, this just doesn't look right, something is wrong here, listen to that voice. Take a moment, stand back, and see if there isn't some data to support that instinctual concern. If you're in a team leadership position and your people are coming to you and say, hey, boss, this just doesn't look right, there's something here that just doesn't feel right, listen. Take a moment, look, and see if there isn't some data to support that instinctual concern. Don't dismiss those instinctual concerns out of hand. Finally, I would make sure that everybody archives and reviews the near misses and disasters that have occurred on your teams and within your industry. And God knows there's lots of disasters out there to learn from, and Harold talked about a lot of them that you've recently had. But let's make sure we don't repeat the mistakes. Oh, that's the greatest tragedy, when you see mistakes repeated. And somebody somewhere else in the industry has already paid with an injury or a death to learn something, and now it's repeated by some other part of the firefighting teams out there. Make certain that you archive and review the near misses and disasters that have occurred. New hires should be required to review them. Everybody should be required to review those lessons periodically. This, by the way, was not done at NASA. 17 years, this is the real tragedy of Challenger. 17 years later, it was all repeated. Normalization of deviance is what brought down Columbia. Now, what happened on Columbia is a piece of foam flew back, hit the left leading edge wing, which has a carbon panel on it. The wings and nose see 3,000 degree heat on reentry. They're protected with carbon panels. In tests that were done after Columbia, they fired some of this foam into panels of this carbon and they blew holes in it. And that's what happened on Columbia. They had a 9-inch diameter hole on reentry. There was a pathway for 3,000 degree heat to enter into an aluminum vehicle that melts at 1,000 degrees. The left wing burned off, the vehicle tumbled out of control, broke up, and 7 more astronauts died. And what you're looking at here, folks, is another example of normalization of deviance at work. Here's a comment made by one of the Columbia board members. NASA had lived for 20 years with the idea that foam, the foam on the gas tank, could not cause a catastrophe. Foam appeared on lists of critical safety risks for every flight, but its defects were given a standing waiver. Normalization of deviance. The lessons of Challenger were forgotten. 7 more astronauts died 17 years later. So let's make sure we practice these fundamentals right here to guard ourselves against that normalization of deviance. We are all vulnerable in hazardous environments that can lead to injury and death.